I would like to take this opportunity to welcome everybody to the Northeast Networks, Statewide Afterschool Networks webinar series. At this moment, we're about to close this poll that you see before you in about another 15 seconds. It looks like we have a lot of folks who are on the call who are really looking forward to vacationing with their family this summer and catching up on some reading. And I love to see that we have a high percentage of individuals who are looking forward to using the new financial management website that we will be reviewing with you today as a new resource. So my name is Katie McGrain. I'm the Executive Director of the Massachusetts Afterschool Partnership, and on behalf of my colleagues at the in the Northeast Network of Statewide Afterschool Networks, I'd like to welcome you, along with our partners at the Wallace Foundation and at Fiscal Management Associates. Today's webinar is brought to you through the Statewide Afterschool Networks webinar series, which came together out of a growing need that we were seeing across our state lines, which to provide professional development and capacity building opportunities for the field. And so there were a lot of trends we were seeing across state lines that we thought we would be able to collaborate on. And so hence we've created this webinar series. This is the last of the school year before we break for the summer. And we're grateful for the 70-plus people who are actually on the call with us today. Today's webinar series is going to talk about good financial management and how that can be the difference between an effective and sustainable after-school program and one that actually struggles to pay its bills and deliver the best services to its students. The resources that we're going to share with you today have been created by the Wallace Foundation and Fiscal Management Associates in an effort to address growing needs that they were seeing in out-of-school time programs across the country. And so at this moment, before we move on and introduce our next speakers, I'd like to introduce my colleague Nora from the New York Network to just talk a little bit more about the statewide after-school networks.
Good morning. So very briefly, for those of you who are not familiar with us, the statewide after-school networks are organizations that come together to bring the after-school, out-of-school time, expanded learning, and summer fields, including providers, participants, funders, state agencies, regulators, other folks who have a stake in the success of after-school time. We at the Northeast Networks is a group of 8 of the statewide after-school networks: Connecticut, Rhode Island, New Hampshire, New Jersey, New York, Vermont, Maine, and Massachusetts. And given our roles as collaborators and networkers within our states, we have been very excited over the last 2 years to be able to also work collaboratively across the Northeast region to bring these webinars and other kinds of joint professional development together. So we appreciate you joining us today. Before I turn it over to Nina Sodenberg from the Wallace Foundation, we have a quick poll to get a sense of what your role is in your organization so that we can help our presenters tailor their message today. So if you want to take a quick 2 seconds here to click on your role within your organization, and then we will share that out with everyone. All right, and while we are finishing up this poll, I'm going to turn things over to my colleague Adam Greenman, who's the Executive Director from the Rhode Island After School Network.
Thanks, Nora, and it's great to see the poll results because I think that will help us tailor the remainder of the webinar to get a good idea of who's in the room. You know, as we were talking about this webinar, and you know, as Nora and Katie both said, we try to make these webinars as useful to the field as possible. And as I go around and talk with after-school programs in Rhode Island and really try to get a sense of what are the biggest needs of the field overall, the consistent answer that I tend to get is that finance and funding tend to be the two biggest needs of the field right now, at least in Rhode Island, and I would suspect across the country. And so as we think about that dynamic of funding but also finance, I think it's really important to make sure that we're doing everything we can to have good financial management on the side of the after-school programs, because that both, I think, leads to better funding opportunities, but it also gives you a sense of exactly what your bottom line is and what you need to run an effective, high-quality program. And so our friends at the Wallace Foundation have also kind of zeroed in on this component. They've really focused on strong financial management as one of the core areas of work that they do, along with the fact that one of their core areas of work is after-school programming. And I'm not going to steal Nina's thunder from the Wallace Foundation, but I do think that it's really appropriate now more than ever to have this conversation about what are some ways that after-school programs, most of us being very small nonprofits, are able to manage our resources effectively, staff resources, financial resources, all of those components that are going to help make for a better, more high-quality after-school program or youth development program for the children and youth that we serve. So with that, I think I hope you all share with me that this is sort of a major concern on your mind, the 22% of executive directors out there, and certainly I'm sure the finance directors, this is the number one thing on your mind. With that, I'm going to turn it over to Nina from the Wallace Foundation, who's the communications officer with the Wallace Foundation, to introduce our main presentation and to really talk about Wallace's investment in this work. So, Nina, take it away.
Nina, you might be on mute. So while we wait for Nina to join us and possibly unmute her line, Nicole, could you just chat her real quickly? I'd like to talk a little bit more about the Wallace Foundation has also made an investment in just recently presented this workshop down in Rhode Island as a workshop series. And so while we are going to be giving you a brief introduction of the webinar series and the webinar tools, we do have opportunities to partner with some of our other statewide after-school networks in your state and in your region to try and provide a comprehensive package around this. And maybe, Adam, you might want to speak a little bit about the series that you just did in partnership with the Wallace Foundation on June 6th and what that encompassed and what the reaction was from your state.
Sure, Katie. Sorry, did I just hear Nina?
Yes,
Okay.
I spoke before and now I'm speaking and I can be heard. Excuse me for my late entrance. But hello, everybody. A poor showing for a communications officer, but I'll make up for it with hopefully some interesting background on the website we're about to see today. Thank you, Adam and Katie and Nora and everyone for joining. So just a bit of brief background. As some of you know, the Wallace Foundation has been supporting the development of after-school systems in cities across the country since 2003. You can see our first 5 cities in red and the next 9 in yellow. The goal has been to advance and to capture what these pioneering cities are doing to expand access to high-quality after-school across the entire community, and then to share those lessons broadly. We have learned many lessons along the way. Here are 2 important ones. Lesson 1, after-school systems can work to increase quality and access. no surprise to those on the line today. Lesson 2, when you build these systems, local organizations often struggle to meet the new demand for quality. So if the demand for quality puts a burden, the heightened demand for quality and scale puts a burden on providers, we wanted to understand what it would take to strengthen providers to be able to deliver high-quality programs to more young people. To do that, Wallace commissioned Fiscal Management Associates, or FMA, a national consulting firm building nonprofit strength, to conduct research. The FMA study was published in 2008, and it includes 2 consistent and key messages. First, financial management is limited in the nonprofit youth-serving sector overall, and that can hurt programs. If your finances are already fragile, it's hard to meet new demands for scale and quality improvement. Second key message, the policies and practices of government and private funders often made it difficult for organizations to operate effectively. When government reimbursements are late, or when the amount allowed for administrative management is low, unrealistically low, operations and program quality suffer. So it became clear to us that strengthening financial management was key to supporting after-school program quality. If you can't pay your bill and your lights go out, your program suffers. You can see Maria Pesquera, an executive director, on that bottom quote. If your program staff are helping with building maintenance or answering the phones, your program suffers. No surprise. The key point is that program quality, and after-school program quality especially, or in particular, is directly connected to strong financial management. Based on the findings of the FMA study, Wallace funded a demonstration project in Chicago to test a 2-pronged strategy. Prong 1 is to improve the financial management of out-of-school time, or OST organizations. FMA led that work, providing intensive financial management skill development to 25 Chicago-based high-performing nonprofits. I want to emphasize that. These were not struggling organizations. These were leading the youth services sector, but their financial house wasn't quite in order in general. Prong 1. Prong 2 is to improve the operating environments of OST organizations by addressing government and funder policy and practices. That work is still being carried out by Donors Forum in Illinois. Today we'll focus on the work by FMA. Unlike most training programs, FMA's intent was to not only train frontline staff, but to build institutional capacity. Happily for us, the work can now expand beyond Chicago, thanks to the website and the work that went into it, most of it by FMA, strongnonprofits.org. The intent of strongnonprofits.org is to provide the means for any after-school provider to benefit from this expert insight into nonprofit financial management. There are resources culled from the variety of templates and guidelines already available online, as well as a suite of resources designed specifically for OST providers. They're picked with care, and importantly, they're all free. So before we go into FMA and the site itself, I will turn back to Nora, and once again, thank everyone for joining us today.
Thank you so much, Nina, and we really can't say enough about how grateful we are to the Wallace Foundation for their support of the out-of-school time community over the last many years at this point. I mean, the research that you all do and the resources that you have developed have truly been extraordinary in their support of the field. In this particular project, I think we are most tremendously excited about. It has I think will change a lot of things for a lot of programs to have access to this quality of free resources. So it is my pleasure to introduce our main presenters today. For those of you who are not familiar with FMA, FMA is a fantastic team of consultants who work specifically with not-for-profits to help them develop the capacity that they need to fulfill their missions more effectively and efficiently. And I think for all of you who have struggled over the years in various times to figure out how to align your mission and your funding, that passion that they have really makes a great deal of sense. While I go ahead and introduce our 2 key presenters, I wanted to ask all of you to take a moment to fill in our quick little survey and give us a financial management goal that you have for your organization. So while I'm introducing you to these sort of fantastic financial managers, you can be thinking about what your dream goals in that direction are. So our 2 presenters today, the first is Hilda Polanco, who is the founder and managing director of FMA. And she is a frequent speaker at major conferences across the nation and also provides direct capacity building, training, and coaching services to foundations and not-for-profits throughout the country. She serves as the treasurer of the board of directors for the New York Better Business Bureau and on the National Advisory Board for the Harvard Journal of Hispanic Policy. She holds the certification in control self-assessment from the Institute of Internal Auditors and the Chartered Global Management Accountant credential, which is awarded by the American Institute for Certified Public Accountants. I was sort of incredibly impressed by the titles of her auditing skills alone. And then she will be joined today by John Summers, who is the Manager of Consulting Services at FMA. He heads FMA's research initiatives and was the lead author of this major study that the Wallace Foundation commissioned that Nina was just speaking about on the administrative management capacity of out-of-school time organizations. He also managed the development of the suite of resources for not-for-profit financial management that we will be discussing today, which is strongnonprofits.org, and you can also find it on the Wallace Foundation website. So we've got 21 responses who have come in so far. I'll give everyone another 5 to 10 seconds to finish typing things in, and then I will close out the poll and turn it over to our presenters. All right, so we'll click down here to 5 more seconds and close out our...
And I'm actually really fascinated with some of these responses, so I think it's going to be exciting to be able to respond to some of these questions and some of your goals with our next presenter.
Great, and Hilda and John, thank you so much for joining us today. We really appreciate your time, and we look forward to hearing from you.
Thank you, and good morning, everyone. The report that you see on the screen here has been recently released from the evaluating firm that has been working with us in documenting and evaluating the work in the Chicago area. And in that initiative, there were 3 key strategic financial management standards that have been identified, that have been both the result of the work as well as our guidance in identifying where we think organizations should be focusing. One, of course, is that in order to succeed financially, there needs to be the ability to develop accurate and realistic budgets for the organizations. We also need to monitor the financial status of individual programs and have an ability to project and manage cash flow needs for the organization. In doing that, in order to have these standards of excellence, organizations really need to work on implementing certain key practices in order to be able to meet these standards. And one of those practices is to have strong financial management resources, and we think this website will be tremendously helpful to you in that area. In addition, the idea that the organizations really need to have procedures and methodologies to generate what we call key performance indicators, the key areas that you will focus on as a roadmap to success. And lastly, one of the areas that we think is extremely critical is that organizations of all sizes have systems to effectively communicate the financial information across the organization. In this initiative, and based on our work nationally with many other organizations providing out-of-school time services, we realized that the challenges faced, and many of them I think were expressed in your goals that you shared with us, is that there's inevitably a feeling of too few staff and too many areas to focus on, and perhaps the staff that are working on these projects do not necessarily have the skills needed to succeed. And one of our goals with the website is to have some turnkey tools that staff could draw upon to address these 3 top areas that we're mentioning. We've also found that the ability to identify true full cost of programming is a challenge, and one that is a critical means of communication with funders, particularly so as to be able to present not only the direct programming, but the organizational costs that each program incorporates. We see a need to be able to manage the financial results and to focus on forecasting and scenario planning and thinking about what are the probabilities that revenues will come in and what actions will we take. And again, the website will be helpful in many of those areas. And lastly, we were happy to see that we had about 12 program staff joining us today. That's really very, very wonderful to see. One of the things that we have learned over time is that your program leadership is part of your financial management team, and they are really in a position to help with the financial management, or I should say lead the financial management in their role as program managers. And so in our work with organizations, we really encourage the executive directors to think of the program leadership in a leadership capacity when it comes to financial management. And if there are situations where your program team does not feel like the skills are there for them to succeed, that energy be dedicated to building those skills and to giving them the tools to succeed. So with that in mind, I'm going to ask John, my colleague here, to give us a bit more perspective on the website and walk us through some of the areas that we think will be very helpful to you.
Thank you. So as Hilda mentioned, our background for the work that we did in Chicago, as well as the work that grew into the website, is this perspective on financial management, that it's really core to the strategy of a nonprofit organization. Too often we encounter nonprofit organizations for whom financial management is sort of almost an auxiliary function. It's something that's done for the benefit of funders or auditors or external audiences who are asking for or requesting information. It's considered, the purview of the accountants and not something that the senior management of the organization and the program management and the sort of organization as a whole gets directly involved in. But the message that we are trying to bring through our work and through the resources available on this site is that financial management is, in fact, a core strategic function of an organization. And it's focused on this question of how best to use limited resources to carry out the organization's mission. We know that inevitably organizations are in a situation of limited resources, and some much more limited than others. And so the decision about how to use those limited resources in the best way makes, if not every decision, at least a lot of key critical decisions that organizations make, at heart financial decisions. So really understanding how to make those decisions in the best way possible is at the heart of strategic financial management. So FMA sees a strategic approach to financial management as being made up of the 4 key elements that are represented on this graphic. So I'm going to be fancy with this little pointer. The central principle of strategic financial management is this cycle of planning and monitoring. So planning is our answer to the question of how best to use limited resources to carry out our mission, and then monitoring tells us how that answer is doing and where it may need to be revised. So we make plans, we make decisions about how to use resources, we monitor those plans to see how they're being reflected in reality, to see where we might need to make changes or allocate additional resources. And then we plan again. And so this cycle is really at the core of strategic financial management. And then financial operations, which includes the staffing, the software, and the controls, so the sort of engine of the fiscal office of an organization, is what really goes to support the planning and monitoring cycle. So good financial operations ensure that our plans are being executed properly and that the information that we're using to monitor our plans and make decisions is reliable. And then finally, the overarching function at the top here is governance. So governance is the element that ensures that all of these things are happening. Planning, operations, monitoring is all happening appropriately, and it's all happening in accordance with the mission of the organization. So linking the financial realities of the organization to the way that it meets its mission is a key role of governance. And so when we get into the website itself, the strongnonprofits.org site, we'll see that the site is structured and the resources are organized based on these 4 key areas of effective financial management. So we'll see planning resources, which includes tools and resources for things like developing budgets, developing programmatic budgets, managing cash flow, strategizing around growth. We have a set of monitoring resources that includes information about financial reporting, how to understand financial information, how to communicate financial information to boards and program managers in a way that helps them to make the most effective decisions. We have resources around fiscal operations, so resources around maximizing accounting software, strengthening internal controls, developing cost allocations. And we have a set of resources on governance. So these are all focused, a lot of educational tools and resources here focused on the board's role in financial oversight and accountability. So we want to take the opportunity to showcase a couple of these resources, but before we do that, we're going to have a little viewer's choice here to actually give the participants in this webinar a chance to pick the resources that we look at. There are actually over 60 resources available. Some of them are tools, templates, Excel tools. Others are articles or handbooks or guidelines, so a wide range of resources. But we want to give you the opportunity to choose the resource, the 1 or 2 resources that would be most useful for you to look at here. So just take a couple of minutes. The options are a tool for developing budgets on a programmatic basis, a tool for projecting cash needs over the course of a fiscal year, a tool designed to help better understand whether a grant or contract opportunity is a good fit for your organization. We have a tool on the managing the monthly closing process and on selecting an auditor. Okay, so everyone can choose one, and then I think we might have time to look at 2. So we'll take the top 2 choices and take a look at those. So we'll give just another.
Seems to be a tight race.
Yes,
for 2 of them.
It's a tight race. It seems that looking at budgets on a programmatic basis and pursuing a grant opportunity are the 2 tools that are most interesting to people. So that's great. So we will take a look at those. Just know that there is a tool in each of these areas as well as many other areas available on the site. So let me just move directly to the site itself now. Again, this is strongnonprofits.org, fairly easy to remember. Type that in and it will take you directly here. And as I mentioned, the resources are organized into planning, monitoring, operations, and governance. So the 2 resources that were chosen for this demonstration are both in the planning area. So let's look at each of those. So the first is a template for developing an organization's budget on a programmatic basis. And we know that that can be a challenge for a variety of reasons for nonprofit organizations and for after-school organizations. And let me go ahead and bring it up. It's an Excel document, as we will see. And all of the tools and templates here have an instructions page that should be useful for the users. So this is a template that will help to organize an organization's expenses into the programmatic and functional areas that those expenses apply to. And we know that one of the issues that organizations face is understanding what are specific expenses, what are the overall expenses associated with a program, including both the specific expenses and the shared costs. So the cost, direct program delivery, so staff staff on the program, supplies for the program, as well as any of the shared costs associated with running the program, but as part of an organization. So rent or occupancy in a shared facility is a good example of that. And we believe that both those specific expenses and the shared costs go to make up the full costs of running a program. And then organizations also have to consider the management in general, or sort of the administrative costs of running the organization as a whole. So the template in front of us right now gives, again, a framework for organizations to do that. And the way it's set up is there's a section for users to enter information about each of their full-time staff. As we know, most nonprofit organizations, after-school organizations, the bulk of their expenses are personnel related, so they will enter information about each of their full-time staff, as well as the amount of time they spend in each programmatic area. And there's actually a sample here. This will probably make a little bit more sense if we look at this sample that's already filled out. So, for example, we have the executive director who spends a portion of her time in each of the, if we have a child care program, each of the programmatic areas, so it's the pre-K, the toddler, and the infants, as well as 50% of time on management in general and 20% on fundraising. So users for their own organization can put each of their both full-time and part-time staff and assign or allocate the amount of time spent in each area. Similarly, there's a section to do that for fringe benefits, as well as other than personnel services. So printing, supplies, audit fees, all of that can be allocated to the appropriate program or function. And then for those indirect expenses or shared costs that go to the organization as a whole, there's an automatic allocation system. So within the template, we have the choice of doing it on a FTE or full-time equivalent basis, as well as a salary basis. And then the template simply spreads that, so the rent expense, across each of the programs on that basis, in this case the FTE. So what that gives us when this template is completed is, we hope, a fairly painless and user-friendly way of determining what the actual full costs of running each program are. So in this case, the pre-K is $224,000, toddler is $214,000, and so on, as well as the costs associated with management in general and fundraising, and then the percentages that each of those make up for the organization as a whole. So for users that or organizations that don't necessarily fully understand something like a statement of functional expenses, where that comes from, this is really sort of a draft or a budgeted version of your statement of functional expenses. It also helps to really understand, again, what the full costs of delivering each program and service for the organization are. So again, that's a very brief run-through of the program-based budget builder tool. Like I mentioned, the tool itself has an instructions tab, and I actually, at my office, happen to be behind a firewall, so we can't see it, but on the page there's actually a little video demonstration of the tool that goes into a little bit more detail about how to use it and some tips. So on your screen, hopefully you would be able to see, if you log on to strongnonprofits.org, a little section right here where we can look at an actual video demonstration of the tool. So let's take a look at one other resource available here, the other choice among the viewers of the webinar. We know that one of the areas for being more strategic in financial management and financial decision-making, particularly in heavily government-funded organizations, which many after-school organizations are, is around the decision about whether it's actually a good idea to apply for and accept a new government or restricted funding opportunity. We have seen organizations often get into trouble, financial trouble, or even program delivery trouble, by going into new contract opportunities that they haven't necessarily fully considered the implications of. So what we have here is what we call a funding opportunity assessment tool, or a go or no-go tool is another way of describing it. And I'll click through here to show it to you. And again, it's just it's a framework for helping organizations to make a better decision about whether to apply for a contract or grant opportunity. It's broken into 3 sections, what we consider the sort of 3 critical areas to address in thinking about this question. First and foremost, obviously, is program delivery capacity. So does the organization have the capacity to deliver on the program? Is it a good fit with the mission? Second, the financial impact. So will this program pay for itself? Will it require resources from unrestricted fundraising or from other programs? And finally, contract administration, the administrative burden of actually managing the contract and reporting on the results. So there is a set of questions in each of these 3 areas, and what we will do is just quickly go through one of them just to give a sense of how it works. Our recommendation for the use of this resource is to convene a group of organizational decision makers in each of the relevant areas. So the finance director, the development director, obviously the director or manager who would be in charge of the program, and have them have a conversation along with senior management about these questions and about ultimately whether it's a good idea to move forward with this opportunity. So just to give a sense of the questions in program delivery capacity, we have questions around, is this opportunity a good fit to the mission of the organization? Would we seek to provide this? So is this central enough to the direction that we are looking to go in, that we're looking for other opportunities to fund this activity? A question about, are there other resources in the community to provide these services? A question about facilities. Do we have the facilities available to provide the program? A question about the personnel. Do we have staff? Do we have the appropriate people on staff to manage and deliver the program? And finally, a question about, do we do this already? Is this an extension of some of the work that we already do, or would this be a completely new programmatic area or activity for us? And what we see when we click through each of these sections, or each of these questions, is an indication, again, not definitive. We think the conversation is really the important part, but an indication based on those responses as to whether it appears that this would be a good match for the organization, maybe a more challenging match, or a really questionable match. And those are each separate, so you might get a different response on whether it's a good programmatic fit as to whether it's a good financial fit. So again, we think the conversation that these questions and this tool raises is very important in making decisions about funding opportunities.
And I just want to add to what John has just mentioned, that at times we find that there is one part of the organization that is really rooting for a particular new opportunity, maybe the program team, or maybe a member of the board that thinks this is a great opportunity. And it's difficult in the eyes of that collegial pressure to go after an opportunity. It's difficult to justify why we wouldn't. And so a tool like this allows any member of the team to actually be able to document the thought process and perhaps be able to come to the table and say, these are the reasons why we're concerned. And you may still go forward with the decision, but knowing that you went forward with the decision with a few areas of concern hopefully will alert all the members of the team, should you have the opportunity to deliver, should the grant become a win, what would be the things you would be high priority to think about. And we encourage you, those on the webinar, to use this tool for a grant that you have already applied for and won, and see if in doing that there are areas that you may want to go back and think about. So we encourage you to try it this summer, even if there isn't an opportunity pending for you.
Okay, so with that, I think we are going to turn things over to Adam to discuss how organizations in the field might be able to use some of these tools and concepts.
Yeah, so thanks, John and Hilda. And so, I've had the opportunity to really take this tool, this website and these tools for a test drive over the last couple months. And, as a statewide after-school network, we are, essentially a nonprofit as well. We're a relatively small staff. So while we don't run direct programming, we have several of our features are very similar to those of after-school programs. And I think some of the concerns and some of the needs, while the programs are different, we operate in a very similar fashion. So there are a couple tools that I just want to highlight as well that I think are really, throughout the website, are really helpful. And some of them are tools, some of them are guides that you can read through, but all of them are really helpful. And I tried to identify, it was great to see various different people on this call, from executive directors to finance directors to grants managers. And so I tried to identify tools that I think would be useful for everyone. And for program directors specifically, I think, and John went through it, but the program-based budget worksheet is really just a great tool. And I have to agree with John. I think that it's really important for program directors to be as intimately involved in a budget process as executive directors are. And the program-based budget worksheet has actually been really helpful for our organization, and I've actually used it already to really segment out the different grants that we have and apportion staff time, apportion resources based on the grants and based on what various funders will actually pay for. And I think from a after-school program perspective, it would be pretty easy to do that as well. So a lot of you probably have 21st Century funding, and that's one of your programs. A lot of you probably receive school-age child care dollars, and that's another program. So I think that for program directors, that's really a great tool, and especially when it's coupled with one of the toolkits that's also on the website, the Nonprofit Cost Analysis Toolkit. So really getting a better understanding, and this is good for executive directors and finance directors as well, but this tool from the Bridgespan group really gives you a good step-by-step guide through every part of the cost analysis process to really get an understanding of what are the true costs of a program. And I think that this gets back to deciding whether a grant opportunity is useful or not as well, because it really does, if the grant opportunity fits well with your organization, you should also want to make sure that you're not missing any of the hidden costs that could be associated with implementing any kind of grant. So, again, I think for program directors, those are two tools that are really helpful, but they're also helpful for other members of the organization. For executive directors, and Hilda talked about this a little bit, and it's really a tool that she shared with us last week here in Providence, and fits well with the tool for assessing whether a grant opportunity is worth it. It's called the Double Bottom Line Matrix. And so all of us in the nonprofit world and the after-school world, and certainly on the program delivery side, are constantly focused on mission, while our finance directors are probably hoping that we're constantly focused on the bottom line and making sure that our programs are not running at a deficit and that our programs are actually financially viable for our organization. And so the double bottom line matrix actually marries the two of them. So it helps you as an organization understand whether something is not just a good fit for our mission, but is a good fit for our budget. And I think, for a lot of organizations, and I think that this is, I could certainly say that this is true for us, there may be a program or a project that you're working on, and you're working on it because there are certain board members that just have a real affinity for it, that they were there when it started and you may not have been, and it's really their baby, but it may be a program that is costing the organization money to run, and and I think the double bottom line matrix and the grant tool both really help to illustrate for whether it's board members, whether it is a program officer department, whether it is, if you're program staff trying to convince an executive director, or whether you're a finance director trying to convince an executive director. It's really useful because it illustrates on a graph. It sort of forces whoever the decision maker is to really look at, this may be high mission, but it's really costing us money, or this may be a great program that's bringing in a ton of revenue, but how close is it to our mission? So that's another tool that I think is really useful and just really helpful to think through as you're using these types of tools. And I think the grant assessment tool is one that's useful for that too. And then I think for finance directors, and I should mention that I am in no way a finance guru, and shared that with John and Hilda last week, and learned quite a bit from their presentation both last week and today. I think one of the key things for finance directors is there is a tool on strongnonprofits.org which is about how to talk about finances so that non-financial folks like me will understand. This is another publication from the Bridgespan Group. It's on the governance page of strongnonprofits.org, and it just has some useful tips that I think are really helpful for helping those of us that are not really financial people to understand the importance of finances and why the financial piece is important. So certain useful tips like avoiding jargon, which I think some of us in the after-school field could probably stand to do as well on some of our things. The notion of using fewer numbers. So really explaining what you're talking about rather than showing us the numbers sometimes is much easier, and that's something that's in the document. And then using the same metrics consistently. So not switching up what you're showing us from month to month, but if you're showing us surplus deficit as the main indicator that you want us to look at, then that should be the indicator month to month. So that we're not getting confused with different charts. And so all of these tools, and this isn't even scratching the surface with all the different tools that are on the website itself. But they're tools that I found very useful. They're tools that have been useful for me both as an executive director and really as a program planner for our organization. So I know John and Hilda have kind of walked you through the website, and I really just wanted to echo their comments and really say that there are a ton of useful tools here. And as I said at the beginning of this webinar, there really is a need out there to focus on finances, to focus on fundraising. And I think that all of these tools help to move nonprofits, whether big or small, in the right direction. So I know we have one more poll question for you before we get to our Q&A, and that is on the page now, and I'll turn it over to John and Hilda. But the question is, what section of the strongnonprofits.org website do you plan to explore first?
Thanks, Adam. So this is Nora. We're just going to give everyone a moment to enter their poll response. And I also want to encourage folks to put their questions into the chat box, as that's going to be the easiest way for John and Hilda to hear the questions that you have and start getting some answers. We have a few minutes left here, so we've got plenty of time for those of you who haven't put your question in yet to start adding those in. Looks like we've got just a couple more poll responses, so let me go ahead and close that out. And it looks like that we've got a clear winner, that planning really is where people are feeling the need for these tools. So I think that's helpful. I hope Hilda and John, as you continue to sort of think about what resources you want to share with us. So the first question that we've had come in that I wanted to highlight for you, can you point out a resource that provides a clear how-to on tracking restricted versus unrestricted funds?
This is Hilda. Throughout the site, there are different ways that we provide resources around restricted versus unrestricted. They're just more topic focused. The particular tool that John walked us through is allocating costs on a programmatic basis. So we're helping you build a program budget. We encourage you to then, now that you have a full program budget to look at, that you then perhaps expand that worksheet to correlate that to restricted funding coming in so that you will be able to identify the amounts to be raised. So that would be a step 2 to the worksheet, but what we don't want is for folks to build a budget based on a consolidation of the contracts they have, but rather first understand what their program costs from a holistic perspective and then see where the funding comes in. There is also an article that I believe is in the monitoring section, which is written by someone on the West Coast that relates to this concept of government grants, and she calls it contract wizardry. And it's a very helpful tool for those individuals that have restricted government funding, and it helps think through what is important to think about, what allocation plans you should have, how to think about getting the maximum amount of dollars covered by contracts. So I would think that that would be a really great tool for those of you that have government funding. And in general, we really promote the idea of a quarterly financial meeting, and I know that's probably mentioned in a few of the articles. So I just wanted to emphasize that one of our key recommendations around monitoring restricted grants is that you implement a quarterly financial review where the program development and finance individual team members are around the table, and you can really assess on a quarterly basis the progress on government and private restricted grants to make sure that we've delivered what we've promised and that financially the systems can report the right amount. And that is something we've seen work really, really well and help teams really come together on delivering on those commitments and doing that in a financially sound way. I guess that would be my answer to that.
Thanks, Hilda. So we actually have had 2 questions come in that I think are both on the Budget Builder tool. So maybe Hilda, you or John can help clarify a little bit. So the first is that the tool is allocating resources based on FTEs, and wanted to know if there was also a methodology in there for allocating based on the building square footage, which is a request that their auditor had made. And then the second question, also on that Budget Builder tool, has to do with whether there is some way to clearly denote through different sheets or different layers on the spreadsheet where the numbers are coming from and where they're going. So I'll let you take a stab, if you don't mind it, further walking us through that tool just a bit.
Sure. So while John is walking us through the tool, I will actually walk through the concept. So in terms of the allocation methodology, we do recommend, even though the spreadsheet allows you to do allocations based on FTE or salary, we do recommend FTE because we think it's a purer indication. If we're allocating office supplies, there shouldn't be the impact of the program with the highest paid staff gets allocated the highest percentage of the office supplies. Office supplies cost us the same whether the president uses them or the administrative assistant. So that's why we believe FTE is purer. It does not have the impact of the salary weight. Secondly, the question that was raised around square footage. And so the tool has 2 dimensions to it. Anything that is in yellow is a direct entry so that you can go in and enter the basis that you're using for allocating. And John is pointing to that right now, and that's in the section called direct expenses. Then in the indirect expenses, a little bit lower on the worksheet, you will see that the yellow is in the total column and then the rest is gray, which means that the template itself, and John is showing us a completed one, the template itself is building the allocations. and we had to pick a methodology, and so we picked FTE. If you have an allocation methodology that is different, that you would actually like to use an allocation that is based on some other element, and square footage could be one, then we would encourage you to add that line on the direct line where you have the ability to actually enter the actual allocation percentages that may not follow the overall schematic of the template. That will still get the dollars allocated in the right way, and it will actually allow you the ability to enter whatever percentage you would like to do. So that's how we would encourage that you add that particular line item. As far as the second question of where do the dollars come from, you can see that the worksheet itself doesn't have multiple worksheets other than the fact that it does have a supplement for the fringe calculation. If organizations aren't sure what their effective fringe rate is, this worksheet actually allows you, knowing what the dollars are, to actually back into the effective rate, which we believe is a very important tool in keeping budgets at a strategic level rather than budgeting down to the last item, since these are all components of fringe rate. The idea of where do they come from, as we go back, you can see that anything that's in gray has a formula that is calculating from the FTE table. And again, anything that's in yellow you can enter yourself. There are no other sheets that come from anywhere else. It's pretty much all built in here on a one-sheet basis.
Great. So we are reaching our time limit. Oh, we've got one last question that I'll sneak in here. So wanted to know if there was an opinion on the ideal mix for funding an agency, such as a third government, a third private, and a third something else, or if you had any sort of general thoughts on what the ideal cash flow mix might be.
So interesting. There are thoughts out there, especially from the Bridgespan group, that talk about how nonprofits get really big. And again, John is going to share the screen here and show us this particular one that is under planning and planning for growth. And this article is an interesting perspective, and their position is that organizations that grow really big grow with one source. They have one partner that gets them to that national level, whether it be government or foundations, or I guess in some cases, very, very significant individual donors. That is a strategy for very, very large growth. When we look at organizations that are smaller and are looking to be sustainable, maybe grow, but for sure have a balance and a sort of stable perspective for the future, that's where the revenue diversification comes in, and we do believe with the idea that there should be some diversification. I don't really have a magic number. I will say this, that for organizations whose government revenue exceeds 50 to 60% of the total, you then become a very limited and restricted operating environment. And so I would encourage those who can to keep government at no more than 50%, if that is at all possible, so that there can be a flexibility that will allow some of the more strategic perspectives and investments that an organization needs to be able to be sustainable and to grow. And so I would say more from limiting the government portion as opposed to having a magic division among the three.
Thanks, Hilda. So I know we want to be very sensitive to people's time. I know a lot of you probably have many other things, including diving into these tools on your plate. But I really wanted to thank again our three presenters, Nina Soderberg from the Wallace Foundation, and again to thank Wallace for their investment in these tools. And then to thank Hilda Blanco and John Summer for presenting to us today and for the tremendous amount of time that FMA put into developing all of these resources. Just want to reiterate, everything that you saw here today and a whole lot of other equally valuable resources are all available for free on strongnonprofits.org. We hope that you will download, that you will share, that you will use, that you will provide feedback. This really is a great set of resources to help you improve your financial management practices. Any other comments from the rest of the Northeast Network team before we close out today?
I would just like to reiterate that we're very grateful for the investment made into these tools and strongly want to encourage folks to utilize them and contact your local statewide after-school network if you want some further assistance in extending and expanding this webinar to a citywide type of professional development opportunity. So we want to thank you, and I too want to thank my colleagues on the call.
Yeah, and I'll just add that thank you to everybody who participated and everybody who joined. This is the last webinar for this year, as Katie said at the beginning, from the Northeast Statewide After School Networks, but we will be back in the fall with our next webinar series for next year. So we look forward to sending that information out when it's available and look forward to all of you joining us then. So just again, thank you all so much for your time, and I hope you have a great day.